Very much for being there. So we have some questions for you. I imagine you don't have any opening statements as per the usual convention. So I guess in relation to these best financial interest duty issues, when the government was elected in May 2022, did it ask the Treasury to look at the best financial interest duty?
Senator, I might just commence with I've been in this role for 1 month, so I wasn't there, but my understanding is that the government did ask Treasury to conduct a review of some of the reforms that came in under the Your Future, Your Superannuation reform, and that included looking at the best financial interest duty. That review was conducted by Treasury in 2022, and the government announced its response in 2023.
Okay, and why did you, well, what exactly did the Treasury recommend?
So I don't have the advice of the Treasury, but the government did not make any changes to the duty. What has occurred since then is in July 2024, APRA released enhanced prudential standard and practice guidance. That's the strategic planning and member outcomes. Those amended standards will apply from 1 July 2025. It does, in that standard, note that a prudent RSE licensee is required to have clear attestation about the controls that are in place and that they are operating effectively to prevent expenditure that would be unjustifiable in the context of the best financial interest duty.
Okay. So that would tell me that you would expect that a trustee would make particular reference of how it is complying with the duty.
That is correct. So the legal obligation on trustees is that they need to ensure that they are acting in the best financial interests of their members. The decisions that they make need to be supported by evidence and analysis. APRA is responsible for taking action where there is evidence that a trustee has not acted in the best financial interests of members. APRA has published a letter that speaks to how it's intensifying its supervisory approach in relation to superannuation fund expenditure.
So, have you had an opportunity to read the Deloitte report into CBUS?
I have.
Yeah, so what then did you make of the Deloitte concern that there were insufficient efforts to document how expenditure might meet the best financial interest duty?
I might make the point, Senator, that as I'm sure you're aware, this report was commissioned as part of enforcement action that APRA is taking. And so APRA imposed additional licensing conditions which led to Deloitte being appointed as the reviewer. Deloitte has made 26 recommendations, and the process now is that CBUS needs to work with Deloitte to develop a work plan to give effect to those 26 recommendations that they've agreed in principle. And so that the matter is really an enforcement matter now for APRA to take forward.
I understand that, but if there is, I mean, Treasury drafted the law, right? So if it says there's a reverse onus, then doesn't that mean that the trustee must, under the law, document how it is making judgments about spending members' money?
That is the requirement under the law, and under the framework where that requirement is not met, APRA is responsible for taking action.
Yeah. So in order to meet the reverse onus, you need to make effort to document what you're actually doing with members' money. You can't just assert that you're getting value from something, can you?
No, that's exactly the points that APRA has made in the published letter that was released in, I think, October.
Okay, so the law is effective as far as the Treasury is concerned. The law is drafted. There's no problem with the law. So
I'll just explain what the law is. We're certainly monitoring closely the actions that not just APRA but also ASIC is taking, and we're going to continue to monitor regulator actions. And as we do, we'll provide advice to government.
So, I mean, as you know, a lot of these issues have arisen because of the howling conflict of interest between the board of the super fund, where people feel that they might may be compelled to actually work for the CFMEU rather than work for the members. And this has led to a lot of these issues being manifested in public. So has the government asked for any advice in relation to the governance and transparency of the super funds?
I might just make the point, Senator, that I can't comment on sort of individual cases. I think Treasury's role is to provide sort of policy advice across the superannuation system as a whole. Part of what that involves is kind of looking at what's the regulators are doing, looking at industry practices, looking at sort of the public discourse, and we just provide advice routinely to government on all of these issues.
But hang on. I understand that. Before you answer the question, I just want to make that point to you that these are laws that the Treasury Department ultimately owns. And so if there's a situation where an organisation has been shown not to document their expenditure, then you would expect there to be enforcement action, wouldn't you?
I would expect the regulator to look at that and then consider what actions they would like to take.
That's right.
It is an independent regulator.
Okay, so on your role as advising government, has government asked for advice on the governance of these super funds since the latest revelations have occurred in respect of the CFMEU and CBUS issues?
So, Senator, as I said, we consistently provide advice and information to government. That's just a normal course of business for Treasury, depending on what we see sort of happening in industry, regulator actions and sort of the public discourse. So we're there to keep government informed.
Have you provided advice on the equal representation model?
Senator, I think I've sort of answered this question. We provide advice to government constantly as part of BAU on a range of different issues that relate to the superannuation system.
Have you received anything specific in the last couple of months on this issue?
Senator, as I said, I've only joined a month in this role. I'm not sure what you said when you said, have you received anything?
Have you been asked to do any particular piece of work in relation to the governance of the super funds since these major issues have been profiled in the past few months, particularly in relation to for example, most people would look at it and say, it seems very strange to me, the CFMEU is allowed to own 21% of a super fund, in this case CBUS, even though it's been put into administration by the Parliament. So I would have thought that the government may have asked you for some advice on those issues.
The point I would make is and again, I can't comment on the individual case, but irrespective of kind of the governance of the board, the composition of the board, it's very clear that trustees have a legal obligation to act in the best financial interests of their members. They have a legal obligation to prioritise their members' interests where there is a conflict of interest. They have an obligation to ensure their directors meet the fit and proper test. And if those obligations aren't met, APRA is responsible for taking action.
So have you provided an oral briefing to any ministers about these issues in the past month?
Senator, I might take that on notice. I think I've given you the best answer that I can.
Okay. Have you written any minutes about the equal representation model and the governance issues in the past month?
In the past month, we've just provided, as I've always said, advice on a number of different issues relating to the superannuation system that go to what we see happening in industry and the regulator actions.
Okay. So then what about the payments which flow from the super funds into the unions? I mean, the CFMEU, for example, will receive, again, on current trends, over $1 million from the CBUS fund in the next year. So have you provided any advice to government on that issue?
Senator, the advice that we're sort of looking at, we look at the framework as a whole. From our perspective, the framework is very clear that trustees have a legal obligation to ensure that expenditure is in the best financial interests of their members. APRA has published a letter indicating that they're going to intensify their supervisory approach. They're also on the record as saying that they will take action to hold trustees to account. That's very much consistent with the statement of expectations that government has set, which requires APRA to promote an efficient superannuation system that delivers for members and holds trustees to account.
Okay, so can you outline the topics of advice on superannuation that you provided to the government in the past month?
Senator, I don't think it's appropriate for me to go to the content of advice that's provided to government. Our role as Treasury...
What are the topics? What are the topics?
I don't think... So, still fairly new. I don't think it would be ordinarily the case that I would identify the topics that we provide advice to government. Our role is to provide advice on the superannuation system generally, and the topics that we advise on will depend on what are the things that we are observing.
Okay. I thought you were taking on notice whether you provided any oral briefings on these superannuation governance issues.
Yes, I have taken that on notice.
Okay, well, I'd be grateful to see what you come back with. And just finally, before you go, I just wanted to understand whether or not the Treasury had done any work on customer service standards, because we heard from the prior sessions that the industry's view is that perhaps these issues to do with CBUS not paying insurance claims in a timely way could be addressed by the industry through industry standards. So has the Treasury done any work on these issues?
So at this stage, I think the work that's underway is actually by ASIC. So as you may be aware, ASIC has commenced a multi-year project looking at industry practices and compliance. The first stage of that process is submission.
Sorry, I don't wish to cut you off, but I'm asking you as the agency advising the government. I mean, you are responsible for advising the government on the law. The regulator is there to enforce the law. So I'm just asking you whether there's been any consideration given to law reform in relation to member service standards.
So as I was saying, Senator, sorry, part of the reason I wanted to go to this is in terms of this multi-year approach that ASIC is taking, their next key step will be issuing a public report in early 2025 that will actually bring together data on claims handling, and I think that would be the basis upon which we would have a look at the practices, and then determine whether there's further action that is required.
Okay, so you haven't done any work in the Treasury on customer service standards in the recent past?
So the work that we're doing is just monitoring and seeing what ASIC is doing in this space. They are very active in this space at the moment.
Okay, but in this term of Parliament, the Treasury did do a body of work to review the best financial interest duty, didn't it?
They did. That's correct.
Okay, so they looked at the best financial interest duty, but nothing on customer service standards.
So the work that we're doing is, we always look at kind of issues that are coming up that we're sort of observing, but I think the lead at the moment is the work that ASIC is doing in this space.
I would add, Senator, that the financial accountability regime is commencing in March 2025, so that will designate accountable people within super funds. And that includes a focus on customer service, member services. So I think there are a few developments happening where we are waiting to see what happens with industry. I'd note industry are also putting out additional guidance themselves and looking at these issues. So I think what Ms Pye said is right, that there are a number of things going on across industry, regulators, plus reforms that have already been put in place that kind of need to coalesce early next year.
Yeah, I mean, the FAR was policy of the prior government. So I guess my question was, is there any work on insurance standards? For example, has the Treasury done anything to look at whether there would be a minimum response time from a super fund when they are deciding to process an insurance claim? And I think your answer is, well, ASIC is doing a piece of work.
So there is a piece of work underway with ASIC. We're always thinking about these issues. It's very much a live issue, but the engagement lead right now is ASIC, and that's primarily because they're going to gather the data that would be important for us to look at. Yeah.
Seems like a very skewed priority. It seems like a very skewed priority to have reviewed best financial interest duty, but not to have done any work on trying to make sure that members were getting the best possible outcomes from insurance claims when they were made. So, but nonetheless, that is your testimony. So we thank you very much